Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am here with Arun Mehta from the Arun Mehta Show. Welcome back, Arun.
Hey, thank you very much for having me back, and I'm really excited about this episode. This is like one of the very few British-Irish things we actually get to do on Casual Chats, and it's one of my most favorite things ever, so...
Yeah, the last time that I talked about anything British-related on Casual Chats was, back in, episode... I don't remember, but it was one of the earliest episodes of Casual Chats. I think it was episode 8 or 9 or something, where I had my former Manic Expression colleague, Gerding Chimp, and we talked about British television shows, more specifically British kid shows. And he doesn't do any posting online anymore, although occasionally I do see him from time to time on Twitter. So shout out to you, Gerding Chimp, if you are listening to this. So yeah, this is something that I had never seen before until watching it for this podcast. Aaron's been knowing about it for quite a while. So today we're going to be discussing about a British/Irish sitcom called Father Ted. And it recently celebrated its 25th anniversary on April 21st, 1995.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of the classic comedy shows here in Britain and also in Ireland as well. And this is the thing, I think a lot of people in America will not have heard of this show. They may have seen the reaction video of some Americans kind of watching it and not actually getting the humor and things like that. And this is the kind of thing about these types of comedy shows. They have a very niche audience, and so, but not niche enough to say that, it's only known by a couple 100,000 people. It's not culty or anything like that. Millions of people do love and admire this show, but I think when people get it for the first time or watch it on DVD or manage to either VPN to get all four, to watch the show, I can understand why some people might not necessarily get its humor right away. It's definitely garnered towards a British audience and definitely plays on lampooning not only just British culture and British TV and various other things that are around it, but also it was part of one of the big societal revolutions, I guess I would say, in Ireland, which is obviously taking on at the time the most powerful entity probably in also societal political forces in the British Isles and also maybe in Europe, the Roman Catholic Church.
Right. So I'm actually curious, how did you first get introduced to this show?
So, Channel 4, for those of you who do not know, is the fourth channel of Britain, if that wasn't so explained enough. But, Channel 4 has always been on the forefront of, this kind of, being edgy and kind of, being a more outside-of-the-box thinking television product. So, a lot of things that Channel 4 has done in the past, they've done various comedy shows. They've also done more documentaries, and also they've done Channel 4 News is probably one of the most hard-hitting, news pieces. I think that news programs I think that are out there in Britain at the moment. Channel 4 gets a lot of praise for some of the stuff that it does. But one of the things that Channel 4 aimed out to do was it wanted to distance itself from the other competition. Now, there's various great comedies out there from the BBC. There's Are You Being Served? There's LOLO. There's also Fawlty Towers as well. But the thing about the BBC comedies is that until fairly recently, they were very played for safe, and also they were kind of on repeat for obviously as a kind of nostalgic thing in British television. We seem to like our old British TV for some strange reason. They used to be these comedy shows used to be repeated all the time in the 90s, and I think but on top of that as well, there was various new age comedy that was really people were kind of craving for, that kind of didn't just make fun of particular characters offences or anything like that, but I think also has a bit of a message to send to kind of like South Park, for example. South Park's been a massive cultural phenomenon. I think we can all agree on that, on the way that it produces itself, but I think we needed something a bit more on the edge and a bit on the nose, and that's where Dermot Morgan came in, and that's when he started doing his father character originally on Irish television. He used to do this kind of thing on RTE, but eventually he would then get his big break later on after he kind of rebelled against the Irish television channel, and then moved over to Britain in London, and then got to do a thing with Hat Trick and Channel 4, which then brings us to basically our subject today, Father Ted. So, Father Ted, for those of you who do not know, it's basically about 3 priests who currently are in a parochial house in a lonely island known as Craggy Island. And so, the premise of this is that, and it's not really fully explained at the very beginning of the show, but Father Ted, basically, in his arc, if you will, in the show, he basically wasted a load of the Catholic Church's money in Las Vegas. I was probably gambling it or something like that. They weren't too happy about that, so they decided to kind of like, instead of like throwing him out of the Catholic Church, they kind of like banished him off to this lonely island with this really this cabbage of a priest known as Father Dougal. And so he's kind of like, you kind of describe probably like a teenager, I think you probably say. I think it's kind of cruel to kind of call him like, this dumb stupid character, when he's kind of more like a 13, 14, very, very, I'm trying to find the word for it. It's he's very impressionable, I think you can say, in that. So he has no sense of reality, I think, of that. He's so young in the world and things like that, but he's you can see that he's like a 30, 20, he's in his 20, early, late 20s but early 30s, something like that. Like he's in that age, so that kind of makes it a bit more funny in that regard. And then you've got this really old drunk Father Jack Hackett, who is basically just has basically fallen into the trap of being trapped on this feckin' island, and so he just drinks his misery away, and he ends up basically just being a comical drunk in this whole thing. And so this is kind of Father Ted's punishment. You could say that it's his own private hell that basically he's in, ironically, being a priest. But this whole, one thing that the whole thing is surrounded in is the fact that not only does it kind of like make fun of the fact that about this corrupt priest who is basically trapped on this island with all these crazy people on it, but also that it kind of in itself makes fun of the Roman Catholic Church in itself, and maybe it's like Irish society in general at the time that it was kind of portrayed as well, as conservative Irish society, if you will.
Yeah, and of course there's the 4th character in the show, Mrs. Doyle, who mostly just serves tea to everyone, and she's just so enthusiastic about serving tea to Father Ted, Father Dougal, and Father Jack. And then there's at times in which she's like a little bit crazy, especially when we come to a few episodes in the series in which when she sees her favorite singer performing on TV and she goes obsessed with him. And then there are times in which she starts like getting even more crazier with her personality when she's introduced to things, and she takes it way out of proportion. But she's the only female in the house who has to deal with the strict Father Ted, the optimistic yet dumb Father Dougal, and the drunkard Father Jack. So, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like she just kind of goes with the flow, and in herself she's very eccentric in herself as well. As if you watch this show, you can definitely tell that's definitely there for that. And the one thing about this, though, and I think this is rather sad, is that while the actress Pauline McLynn does acknowledge that she did play this character at one particular time, unfortunately she's decided that she's one of those people who decided that was a moment in her career, but that she wants to leave it in the past. And to this day, she actually never actually kind of goes out of her way to do interviews for this character.
She's one of the very few main actors who's still around for Father Ted, but we'll get to that much later on.
Yeah.
So I can understand, because if she has done much more television or performances that maybe her character is a little bit more fleshed out, or maybe that she's more proud of in her performance, then maybe maybe with, Mrs. Doyle, maybe for some people they see it as kind of like really regressive. It's like, oh, she's just there serving tea and that's pretty much it. Maybe, which is something I noticed when watching this show, is that there's some politically incorrect moments in this show.
Oh yes, and you can definitely tell that this was not made for an American audience in some places. So but I mean, the way I would defend it though, like, I mean, I guess one episode I guess we thought was very, very uncomfortable was when they did the talent contest with when they did the three Elvises, and then there's also these other three characters which basically are like the polar opposites of the people on Craggy Island. So you got Father Dick Byrne and his all the opposite characters that they have as well, and there's one bit in it where basically they go into blackface and they dress up as Diana Ross and the Supremes as their one. But
I was like so uncomfortable.
It was, but I mean, it is uncomfortable. I think definitely for an American, you definitely tell it was not built for an American audience. But I think it kind of just shows how out of place. This is one thing that you'll notice throughout the entire show when you watch it. The Catholic Church is so out of touch with the rest of society. Like, you think that priests like Father Ted and Father Jack and Father Dougal would not be in the Catholic Church at all. But instead, they've basically been hiding them in this place, wink, wink. And then you've got, like, other times when they're trying to defend, like, at one point, Father Ted tries to defend the use of artificial contraception when, in an argument with that milkman in that episode. And so, like, you can definitely tell in that there's they're pulling out the fact that the Catholic Church in itself is either hypocritical or it's it has like it's completely out of touch with like the rest of the society in a way, and or he's kind of isn't listening to basically the terrible things that are going on around them. So I would defend that they would basically that would just be another part of that fact that they're just so out of touch with society and out of touch with reality that they would basically go off and do this, like
sure. And I guess that if it is a particular religion, especially a huge religion as the Roman Catholic Church, then yeah, I could probably see that they're so out of touch with the rest of society. But there's some points in which like the rest of society seems to deem them as like the higher ups. Like, they treat them with respect and they seem to follow their every word. And also, they, even if they're doing the most wrong things possible, they just ignore it. I mean, like, there's so many moments in this show that were like, okay, they went there.
Keep this in mind, like, this show doesn't, like, break the fourth wall in any way, so, like, it's all contained within the humor of the show. So, the idea of, basically, we're looking in, basically, into this kind of, like, this crazy world of Father Ted, and so it kind of, if anything, it kind of makes us kind of, like, question, like, oh, hey, why are we listening to these people? Why do we treat them with, like, with seriousness? I think that was the reason why many priests and many people within the Catholic Church despise this show, because it's showing it really does not let up on lampooning this this religion. It's
right.
That's one
which is a very rare
yeah.
thing. I mean, like, how many shows do you know of that is focusing on a particular religion? Like, you don't see a lot of shows about the group of people who are in the Lutherans or the Presbyterians or anything like that. Unless, of course, it is a show that is particular about sharing their religion, but not any show that make fun of their religion. And here's the thing, like, next to politics, religion is very divisive. Some people are religious, others are not. Like, they're atheists or agnostic. So it's kind of hard to, like, especially maybe for, like, certain cultures to, like, try to make fun of certain religions because then they'll be insulted. I mean, I can understand why the Catholic Church may have not liked Father Ted when it first came out. It's like, oh, they're making fun of us, or everything they're saying is wrong, or everything they're saying is right, and they're not supposed to know about it. So, yeah, but I think that, for some people, I guess, for those who watched it the first time, it's like, oh, this is hilarious because, it's able to make fun of a religion. It's able to go there. It's able to take those kind of risks. But sometimes those risks don't give you rewards. I'll just tell you that.
Well, I mean, like, but again, like, it's people found it funny. Because it was more, it wasn't more like, I think this is the thing, the reason why Father Ted probably did not take off very well in the United States if, the way that it did, because, I think, American humor is obviously very different from British humor. I mean, our humor is kind of like, oh, hey, here's this scenario, and, oh, isn't this so funny? And, but I think many US, people who would look at, the Father Ted would look, oh, here's this scenario. Wait, is this, that, and the other happening? Why is everybody laughing, I think there's two perceptions, I think, to Father Ted, and I think it all kind of goes on the way that the humor is presented, and because unfortunately there's a reason why a lot of British humored shows don't seem to take off in America compared to a lot of American shows that do, so because the humor is so radically different. I think that's where what you get between Father Ted and what you get between other shows that would exist in this world, if you will.
Yeah. I guess we can talk about some of the episodes. So, what would you say for those that are curious about watching Father Ted? Which episode would you say are the best ones of the series?
That's a really hard one, because this is the thing about Father Ted. I can't really say there's actually a bad episode of Father Ted. This is the thing. I think that's the reason why I consider what the whole show kind of really golden, because you could. One thing I will definitely say is that I think the opening episode, I don't particularly like the first episode. I'll be honest with you. Good Luck Father Ted is probably not. It is a kind of a quiet episode, I think, and I don't think it's a good one to kind of start off with it, I think, at least in my opinion. I would say some of the most notable ones that everybody usually talks about is A Song for Europe, because it has that song My Lovely Horse in it, so the one where they try to get into the Eurovision Song Contest. I think that's one that definitely everybody definitely talks about in that. And then there's Cigarettes, Alcohol, and Rollerblading, which is again is another Series 2 episode. And so and then there's Rockahula Ted, which is obviously the one where he goes into is that the one that's he talks about? That's the one where he talks about feminism, Sinead O'Connor gets involved in a parody of Sinead O'Connor gets involved.
That is a reference that only people from the 90s would understand. So for those who don't know, Sinead O'Connor was a singer. She famously grabbed a picture of the Pope and lit it on fire. Mm-hmm. And it got so much controversy, so much bashing, that she essentially just, was kind of not banned, but she was put on the side for a while. She wasn't able to release her music or talk to the press without everybody bashing on what she did.
She basically suffered the same fate as the Dixie Chicks, basically, when they started to condemn George W. Bush.
For those who don't know, the Dixie Chicks were a country singing group that talked very negatively about George W. Bush in a time after 9/11, and during a time in which when we were thinking about going to war against Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were saying, no, it's wrong, it's immoral, and every American was in its post-patriotic 9/11 hooray America kind of thing. And we let's just say we don't look back fondly of that now, but back then, if you were not an American trying to be patriotic about what happened after 9/11, you were just considered to be a severe outcast. And the Dixie Chicks got blacklisted for many years, and they haven't been able to do any music ever since.
Yeah. And looking at other episodes of Father Ted, obviously there was Good Luck Father Ted, which was the first episode of the show. And then there was Entertaining Father Stone, where you had Father Stone with his mustache, who basically was described by Father Ted as a wall with a mustache. Just these awkward, quiet moments, and how basically he's just like a black hole that just sucks the life out of everything. And so that in itself is quite hilarious. And then there's the episode The Passion of the Saint Tibulus. This is the episode where Jim Norton gets his debut as Bishop Brennan, and so the very angry, very hypocritical bishop, and you had to figure out it's actually interesting that they kind of went there as well, oh hey, here's this bishop, and he's massively corrupt. He's sharing bathtubs with women, and he's got a secret family over in California, and it's oh my goodness, it's just like he's also a scary and intimidating character as well, but the fact that he has all these flaws. So he's a very complex character in the show, I would say, and a very good foil, I think, for probably Father Ted and everyone else around him. So, like, that's...
Yeah, exactly. And I think that for the most part, I think that in like the first handful of episodes, I think they were starting to get their groove. They're starting to say, okay, we want to introduce the characters, we want to introduce the situation, and maybe we can't push it too far, but we want to see what kind of jokes and what kind of stuff we can get away with. And I think that like towards season 2 and 3, well, you call it series, but we call it season. Like every time that it broke off into multiple episodes, which is a little bit different. Actually,
technically, what we're speaking of is seasons here. I mean, if we're going to talk in the American context, so I mean, then season 1, I guess you could say, they ended with competition time, which was the Elvis lookalike competition, and that was obviously the one with the very controversial thing in that. And then there was And God Created Women, which is the one where Father Ted meets novelist Polly Clark, and then he starts to have like he feels like he's moving away from the Catholic Church and might actually end up kind of like defrocking himself, in a way. So like then there was I'm surprised actually that wasn't the final episode of the show, to be quite honest with you, because the final episode of the season, I do apologise, because the one after that is granting to him an eternal rest, which is when Father Jack is quote unquote died, and therefore they think that he's their Father Ted and Father Dougal are going to get a whole lot of money as long as they kind of have one last night with him in the mortuary. So it was that was an episode. I'm quite surprised that was like the final episode, and that one, and God Created Women, wasn't the final episode of the season.
I'm actually curious about how you guys do like series or season divisions, because I looked at Father Ted and it's kind of unusual. I guess it's kind of like similar with Faulty Towers as well, in which it was like divided into like 6 episodes. But in America, usually a season would either be 12 or 13 episodes or 26 episodes for a season.
It's the thing about this is that back in this time, keep this in mind as well. Like these smaller production companies, they didn't know if a show was going to be successful or not. Keep this in mind. They didn't have. I don't think they have the luxuries of today, where basically you're incorporated into a multi-billion dollar studio company, and basically say, oh yeah, well you're going to make 2 seasons of this, and don't worry about it too much, and things like that. I know if you maybe super successful, maybe you make 100 episodes. Something like that. But, I think shows like Father Ted didn't have that luxury. They didn't know if they were going to be, renewed for another series or anything like that. Basically, they just, they ordered 6 shows, and then they said, okay, well, if people like it, we'll order some more. It wasn't always a guarantee. So, then we obviously move into quote-unquote season 2, which is actually series 2. But so we start off with Hell, which is when they finally have their encounter on a holiday with Father Noel Furlong, who is actually the guest host Graham Norton, who now hosts a popular talk show on BBC One. And so he's introduced into this episode, and oh my goodness, he is the most irritating person we think we've probably had in comedy for a very long time. He's getting people to do river dancing inside this small little caravan, and he's getting to sing on the light of the moon and things like that. Oh my goodness, the great thing about this is that he thinks that he's partying with all these young people, and but in reality he's just really over exaggerated, and all these kids around him are just really quiet and just basically just trying to just kind of humor him in a way. It's right. This is the thing about this. Can we argue that there hasn't been a guest character in this season which hasn't been out of place in a way?
Now here's the thing. Now this is going to be something different, because I didn't know who most of these people were. You do, because you're British. Yeah. I mean, like that one episode where, some guy comes along and Father Ted's asking him, do the catchphrase. And I'm like, Aaron, what is he talking about? What catchphrase? Who is this guy?
I don't believe it. Yeah. And,
have to explain that to the audience who are listening.
So, in regards to that episode, so for those of you who don't know, Richard Wilson was also a comedian in himself, and he also did shows like One Foot in the Grave was the show that they were referencing, which is another British comedy show, and he's also appeared in a show called Keeping Up Appearances, which is a show that it's kind of kind of stole the show over that, really. But the catchphrase, I don't believe it, came from One Foot in the Grave and just kind of Richard in general. And so when he came over to obviously do Father Ted, obviously that was his big thing at the time. So obviously they just made a massive deal of that, and so obviously there was the hilarious thing where Dermot Morgan walks up to him and just kind of shouts it right behind him, and then obviously gets roughed up because of it. So like, it was so that was also Father Dougal's reaction is also brilliant as well, as like doesn't look like he appreciated it, Ted. It's like it's brilliant, and but yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think the fact that a lot of Father Ted and a lot of the jokes, I guess you could say they're more in jokes than they actually are, kind of like jokes that normally everybody would get, because you got jokes from like the Generation Game, which was another show back in the 90s, which is hosted by Bruce Forsyth and then hosted by Jim Davidson, and then you had had some references to British TV commercials, like Ferrero Rocher, when Mrs. Doyle comes in and does the whole presentation of the Ferrero Rocher in that episode when the other priests come over to obviously beautify a stone. And then there's just so much stuff here that relates to British humor and British culture and things like that. And so I can kind of understand why in America this wouldn't, unless they put in some more American references, no one was really going to get it. Unless you count the final episode where they were talking about, LA gang violence and things like that. That's as closest to America they actually get.
Okay, yeah, that is the closest. Yeah, and that's the last episode in which, like, an American priest went over to see Father Ted and it's like, wow, you are a great priest and you know how to reel everybody in. Why don't you come over to California and you can be a priest and you get to have yourself your very own basketball court and swimming pools and then when he hears about the LA riots, which, again, for those who don't know, around the early 90s, that was when the poor African-American community in California were rioting against the police because they felt that they were being mistreated and they were being arrested constantly. And so for days upon days, there would be so many riots involving with gunshots, fires, and a whole bunch of things. So, again, if you are not familiar with these 90s references, you're probably not going to get the show. And I got it. And that's probably one of the very few things I did get the reference to. And I thought it was hilarious. It's like, oh, I can't go to America because of the LA riots. It's like, okay, sure, it's fair. But at that point, the LA riots was like not really that common. Around the early 90s, sure, but that was when they started increasing, the police force and all that kind of stuff. But the fact that that's the only reason why he wasn't able to go to California because of that is just hilarious. And the fact that, him only going to America and then Father Dougal, Mrs. Doyle, and Father Ted Father Jack thinking, oh, we're going to go to America. We're going to, leave everything behind. We're going to get rid of all of our furniture. We're going to walk around with these American flags. And, Father Ted doesn't have the heart to tell them, oh, we're not all going, it's just me who's going. And the things that he did, like, telling them, oh, I'll take care of the tickets, or, wait in this spot and, we'll board. And then when he changes his mind, he's like seeing all of them holding American flags, is like waiting for their flight. And then eventually, they don't go, and then they just think about all the good times, which is a clip show of all the moments that happen in each series. Which
at the very end is a clip show. It actually is a full proper episode at the very end. But in a way, in a way, it's. It gets to that in a minute. But in a way, that's kind of like a very sad way for like the show to end. But obviously, we'll get to that in a minute. But just going through some of the other episodes as well of series 2. I think series 2 is probably the strongest, season / series, I think you could say, of the whole show. Is like it's got a lot of hilarious things in it. So I mean, you got Think Fast, Father Ted, which is
in
where
fact, I actually have it right here. There was a poll that a fan site back in 1999 called the Craggy Island Examiner, and they were asking everybody what was the best episode of the series, and mostly every episode is either from season 2 or season 3. And I'm sure you can guess which one was number 1, Aaron.
Yeah, was it? I'm taking a massive wild guess here. Would I definitely say it's a Song for Europe?
Of course it is.
My lovely horse.
Yeah, 22% said it was the best episode of the series. And number 2 was Are You All Right There, Father Ted, with 19%.
Yeah, Oh, You're All Right There, Father Ted is a pretty all right episode. But I mean, Song for Europe. I mean, just focusing mainly on that. I mean, the fact that you have this, there's just so much going on. Like you've got Father Ted and he's coming up with this scheme to try and write a song, and it's like how stressful could it be? And then you see like it's the whole room's full of like cigarette smoke, and he's just yelling at Father Dougal to like play a particular chord on that, and like, oh my god, it's just hilarious. And then they come up with the actual song, and it's absolutely garbage.
So Father Dougal decides to help out Father Ted by playing some really obscure song on his record player, and they think, oh, let's see if we can just use that song because nobody's really heard of it before. But then they realize
there's also that as well. The other thing about it as well is because that the people who apparently everybody who was involved with it died in a plane crash, so that's the reason why they could get away with using it. But obviously the fall of that is that unfortunately it was public domain, and therefore elevator music and everything like that, everyone else like that can of course also use it as well. So they were just going to be caught out by that. So but the thing that gets them out of the situation, actually winning the song for the Song for Europe Ireland side of the contest. For those of you actually we should have explained this as well. The Eurovision Song Contest, for those of you who do not know, is a competition that is organized by the European Broadcasting Union. So all the TV shows from all over Europe get to basically pick a band or a pop group or something like that to go to a particular country and compete in this whole massive night for basically crowning someone the winner of the Eurovision Song Contest. And so the way that it's portrayed now I don't know for definite if this is how Ireland does it or not. I'm not too sure, but it looks like they basically do a show and then you have a lot of entries in, and then they basically pick the winner. The judges will pick the winner out of the night. The reason why Father Ted and Father Dougal win the contest with that really awful song is so hilarious. I don't even know if I even want to spoil it or not about why they win it,
I think we should.
No, okay. Go watch that episode and figure out why, and find out how they won the Eurovision, not the Eurovision Song Contest itself, but how they won the Irish Song for Europe composition. And oh my god, you'll be laughing. It's so hilarious how it all goes down. But that is...
and as for the second most popular voted episode, Are You All Right, Father Ted? Oh, if I wasn't uncomfortable with the episode we just talked about previously, this is the episode that made me feel so uncomfortable. It was kind of like that episode of Faulty Towers that we watched, Aaron, about the Germans. Let's just say it's very, very politically incorrect for the Chinese.
Yeah. So the background of this episode is that Father Ted has finally moved out of Craggy Island. He's finally found the parochial house he's always dreamed of being at. So he gets to play tennis whenever he wants. He gets to basically do mass whenever he wants. He's not doing mass, repeatedly like he is doing on Craggy Island, but over and over and over again. But then they find out that there's some weird anomalies in the finances book, and which finds out that he's actually been misusing money again in the Catholic Church, and ends up getting sent back to Craggy Island. And in his absence, he didn't realize that actually a Chinese community had actually moved into Craggy Island, and when he decided to make fun of them in a very racist way, then there's some Chinese family find out about it and then spread it amongst the village, and then everyone starts calling Father Ted racist, and then he has to find some hilarious way to basically get out of it. So it's
and first it starts off really well with Father Ted being very nice to some of the Chinese people, but then there was this case in which when he visited one of the old priests and he turned out to be a former Nazi, and he had this had this room that was decorated with Nazi propaganda decorations, and that he died, and then he's like, oh, Father Ted really liked my decorations, I'm going to give everything to him. Yeah. And then, and then we have that scene in which when, Father Ted is talking to the Chinese and they're starting to get along really nicely. But then
obviously, well, let's not spoil that either. This ties in together and you're all about to find out, why all this just kind of falls to pieces. But that is, Are You Alright There, Father Ted is a hilarious way to begin the third season, I have to say. And actually, before we talk about the third season, there is something we do have to bring up tragically, which is that before this season, this was going to be the final season of the show, no doubt about that. And Father Ted, Dermot Morgan was going to move on to do something else. The night that they were celebrating the wrap-up of the show, Dermot Morgan sadly collapsed on the bed and started to have a heart attack. And so, despite obviously attempts to resuscitate him and all the opportunity, obviously, trying to get him to be all right, he unfortunately he passed away. And so it made season 3, I think, a lot more prominent. I think in a lot of the amongst comedy fans in Britain, because it was going to be like the last time we were going to see Father Ted for forever. Basically, it was. I think it gave season 3, I think, a lot more of a boost. I think after that, and so it was so sad the way that we lost him, and I was watching the documentary as well on his career, and the fact that he'd just been under so much stress doing the show, and because he was going a mile a minute, he was constantly trying to do stuff, and he was just constantly trying to make this work and everything like that. He was constantly stressing himself out over that, and it's sad that it kind of led to his demise, really, and so it's just obviously, there was the fact that he was a smoker as well, which obviously didn't really help. But it's very sad that we lost him at a very young age. I'd really be interested to see what he would have thought of comedy today. If he was still with us today, or even what he would have gone on to do. After Father Ted, where would he have gone after? Yeah. Would it have been a case where he would have? This is another thing as well. One thing he didn't want to happen in his career was to be typecast. And, because I think we've all seen what's happened with, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars and seen what's happened with Adam West in Batman. But, the fact that, unfortunately, he passed away.
He means by Mark Hamill, by the way.
Yeah, but, Mark Hamill with Luke Skywalker, and also Adam West with Batman. But it's sad that he passed away when he just finished doing Father Ted, because, now we know Dermot Morgan as this character, and when we all know that he was far more than that. He was a comedic genius. He'd done various other stuff before then as well. So, but alongside of that, season 3 was a big one, and to start off with "Are You Alright There, Father Ted," I think was a very good way to start off. I think after all the tragedy that I think had struck as well. And then we got to basically one of my other favourite episodes in the show is Chirpy Burpy Cheap Sheep, which is about the Craggy Island has this regular King of the Sheep competition. Just go with me on this. And there's this sheep called Chris, who is destined to be the champion of this, but they spook him with this talk of a beast that roams Craggy Island and eats sheep or terrorizes them and stuff like that. So obviously now he's not in a chance to compete, and now he's obviously not eating. He's burping as well, which is something that apparently that's very frowned upon amongst King of the Sheep. But Father Ted takes it upon himself to basically nurse Chris back into health, and obviously gets him ready for the competition again. So it's and so another thing, episode that came up with us was a you could say it was a Speed sequel. So if Speed 2 Cruise Control wasn't terrible enough, here comes Speed 3 from Father Ted.
Oh my God. As of right now, I know Keanu Reeves has been talking about a Speed 3 for the longest time, but this is the only one that we've gotten. So Speed 3 is about this milkman who is the most revered milkman in all of Ireland, and everybody loves him. All the women love him. And it turns out that he happens to be a womanizer. in the most literal sense. And then Father Dougal is like, oh, I want to be a milkman too. That looks like a lot of fun. And so he does at some point. And then there's this reference about
there's an important thing to this as well. Like when all this happens, when Pat Mustard is the name of the milkman, what happens is that it's found out that he's actually having sexual relations with his customers whilst he's out doing the milk. So what happens is that Father Ted and Father Dougal obviously do some digging into this, find out that get all this evidence that he's basically been improper in his profession, give it to his boss, and gets him pretty much fired. And so, but then there's a situation where they don't know who's going to deliver all the milk now to Craggy Island. So what happens is that Father Dougal volunteers to do it, which is hilarious because it's like, it's not like I do feck all around here anyway. So he's like, dude, you're a priest, you're supposed to say mass and stuff like that. But that's just the hilarious part of it as well. Like he goes off and does this, and then the problem is that when he goes off and to do the deliveries, Pat Mustard has planted a bomb under the milk float. So when it goes over 4 miles an hour, it activates, and if it goes under 4 miles an hour, it blows up. So that's
there you go.
I know they just do all the hilarious stuff with it as well. Like there's one scene where they do this thing with cardboard boxes. Like there's a whole bunch of cardboard boxes in the way, and then Father Ted has to move them all to the side and then drive through them himself. And then they just randomly start watching the Poseidon Adventure, which I think is going to be. I think that's going to be an episode of of our series In Search of the Crystal Skull that we're going to be doing fairly soon.
Yes, it is actually.
Yeah. So, that's another hilarious episode as well. And then. I can say that this next episode, I'm really surprised that this wasn't being considered for maybe even a movie or something like that for Father Ted. But there's an episode called The Mainland where they go off to the mainland of Ireland to basically do things that they can't do on Craggy Island. So Mrs. Doyle goes off and visits a friend. Then Father Ted and Father Dougal go to visit the caves, and Father Jack goes off to get his prescription for his glasses. So there's various things.
Yeah, and this is the episode where we got to see the comedian, and Father Ted is asking him to do the catchphrase.
Richard Wilson, I don't believe.
Yeah, Richard Wilson.
I don't believe it. Oh, that's just brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting moments. It's we have Father Jack who's trying to get himself a drink, and then they say to him, "I think you've had enough," and then he just punches the guy, and then he wanders into an eyeglass place, and it's like, "Oh, can you read this?" The whole thing says drink,
and that's basically his only words that you'll know Father Jack will say in the whole show is drink, feck, ass, girls, and that's pretty much his whole mantra, pretty much the entire time. There's only one episode where he does actually get sober and he does realize that he's back on the island, and so there's that. But we'll leave that, and I'll let you watch that for yourself. But that's brilliant as well. But the mainland in itself, I think it's probably the most varied episode of the show, because you've got Father Jack obviously going off to try and find a drink, ending up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then getting arrested, and then you've got obviously them going through the caves, bumping into Richard Wilson, obviously pissing him off, and then obviously Graham Norton comes back to revise his role as Father Noel in the episode, and then you've got Mrs. Doyle having that fight in the tea room, and then obviously getting arrested herself, and then it all just kind of ends up at the police station. So and that's pretty much how we end the episode. So, that's
it's definitely the most complex episode out of everything. I mean, I think that some of the episodes that have a lot of things going on is obviously the Christmas special, and to some extent maybe the last episode of the series, because we get to see a lot more characters and it delves into a finality. But yeah, the Mainland is definitely an episode that has just so much going on, because it focuses on all the characters as opposed to just mostly Father Ted and Father Dougal.
Yeah. And then we finally get to Escape from Victory, which I guess you could say is like part one of like part two of like a big story that currently is currently going on, because there's this over 75 football tournament that they have between Rugged Island and Craggy Island. So these old priests just kind of like got together, like, oh, it's just so hilarious, like watching them just kind of like, you know, just stumble around like trying to kick a football, and it just kind of like pokes fun at like people's love of football as well, which as a soccer support, and by the way, it's not American football, it's soccer, by the way. Sorry, I should just put that right there. But imagine how hilarious would it be if it was American football? You know, like you just saw these old people.
Man. That's, I could imagine.
Yeah, it's like it's just where it's like kicking the angle. It's like football. Like, I don't know, but you know, so it's a soccer game for those in America, but it's football over for us here. So they have this whole and obviously there's a bet that takes place in that. So the last time that Dick Byrne lost this bet, apparently he had to yell. I think he had to yell bollocks in front of somebody, and I think in front of a crowd of people, and so they end up going through into the game. They end up winning it. However, they find out that Father Ted actually cheated in the game, but we won't spoil that for you. We'll let you know how he did it. But then he ends up finding out that he has to kick Bishop Brennan up the arse. And that moves on to the second episode, which is kicking Bishop Brennan up the, literally called kicking Bishop Brennan up the arse. So in this episode, which is part 202, they set up this whole. Dick Byrne sets up this whole thing where they think there's a holy image of Bishop Brennan himself in the skirting board of their attic. So they end up going up there to actually go see it. And in the first attempt, he kind of wimps out on it, but they end up taking the roads in, quote unquote, meaning that they've had to. That the Bishop Brennan and his associates are stuck once again in for the night. And so then Father Ted then has a change of heart, and because Father Dougal tells him, well, you could try and kick him up the arse, but then he'd be so unbelievable, he wouldn't realize that you did it, wouldn't believe that you actually had done it. So he does it again, he finally is successful, and then everything else after that is just so hilarious, because he's just in this state of shock when it happens. So, and like
he doesn't even realize it at first until he gets in the plane, and he's like, wait a minute.
No, it's even more hilarious than that. It's actually when he's in front of a particular somebody that he does it and then shoves him to the floor. But it's so hilarious. I think we should probably not spoil that either.
Okay. Let's not.
Yeah. The thing about this guy, like, there's so many hilarious things, but they kind of involve spoilerish. This is the thing about Father Ted. It is one of those must-watch shows because the humor is so much tied into the spoilers of the plot that you really need to go off and see it. Because I think if we spell it all out to you, I think we'll find out that you're not really going to, really appreciate it when you actually go find and see it. So, that's just
I think that we should start wrapping things up. I actually did find this really interesting article on both Guardian and Digital Spy that starting around 2003, they wanted to do an American version of Father Ted because they were starting to do American versions of other British shows such as The Office. And over the years, they've been trying to do this like on and off for the past 15 years. The most recent information that we've gotten was from Digital Spy, in which they said, we're going to plan on doing this American remake of Father Ted, and it's going to be set in Boston. And Graham Lenham, who is the co-creator of the show, he said, like, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life.
It wouldn't work.
And I just want to let you know, it will not work. I mean, it'll probably be at some points blasphemous if you do it wrong. But also, I've noticed when watching the original, especially for somebody who had never seen it before, there's some things that you will definitely not get away with. Like around the time period, I think you could. But nowadays, with everybody being so politically correct and, everybody gets insulted even with the slightest thing, it's like, no, you can't do this.
I just think it's the type of humor as well, because I think if they did an American version of Father Ted, they'd have to make fun of American things. And I think,
exactly.
like, this is the thing like this. I mean, like, what, is there going to be an episode where Father Ted visits the President of the United States? And, like, they just have a whole thing like that. It'd be an even weaker version of, like, the episode of Kenan and Kel when they visited the President. Like,
that would be really weird, yeah.
I know, and then another thing as well, like, I'm just trying to think, what would a modern Father Ted in America basically make fun of in this day and age? It'd probably make fun of reality shows, no doubt about that, and probably, like, participating.
Yeah, they'll probably make fun of reality shows. shows. Maybe they'll. I think maybe you remember a few years ago when MadPat gave the Pope a copy of Undertale.
Yeah, I remember.
They'll probably do a reference of that,
maybe
like YouTubers, and maybe like trying to convert them into God or something.
Yeah,
and also maybe like some of the jokes that they try to do in the original about like, this Eurovision thing. It's like, how about if we sign them up for America's Got Talent or The Masked Singer or something like that, or maybe for let's see if I can think of anything else like. Maybe the episode. I mean, there's a handful of times in which they do reference movies, like Night of the Living Dead and Speed, like we talked about before. So maybe they'll like make fun of like newer movies. Like, oh man, imagine Father Ted making fun of a Marvel movie.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. Like, I kind of wince at the idea of them kind of like doing an American version of this show in a way. Like, I mean, like,
no, that's not to say that it hasn't worked. I mean, it has. I mean, All in the Family, The Office, they've all been great examples of taking a British show, making it Americanized, and doing its own thing, and it's succeeding.
Yeah, but like the Office, I think is obviously is a very common is a very common thing. I think to obviously transfer over. I think like, but there was a time when they tried to do Red Dwarf. And like that just didn't work, and like I think it ended up kind of like being made for like a couple of episodes, and then it just died. There's some things that will translate well because they obviously are a common setting. The Office is a common setting, like
sure.
Something like Father Ted, which is gonna have to basically go balls in and be able to basically make fun of whatever else controversially as well. Father Ted, one thing you'll definitely know about its humor, it doesn't pull punches. I definitely tell you that it hits the mark in some places, and he's not afraid to offend you or none either. And like
absolutely not.
Yeah, and is an American Father Ted going to do that? Absolutely not. They will play it safe. They really will do. Unless like I don't know, like unless it's Adult Swim who make this thing, or maybe like something like So Out There or something like that. Maybe if maybe like some out there, maybe even Spike did it. I don't know. Like it would not.
Spike. Here's the thing: Spike doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like but it would have to be an edgy television product that would basically have to create Father Ted if it was to do it. Like Channel 4 is a pretty out there organization still, even though it is like part of the mainstream now. It's been there since 1980s, but I mean, like they would need. It would have to be like a fledgling station that that is basically getting an upstart and is not afraid to make fun of, not afraid to basically take risks to get views. And that's the thing. And like, unfortunately, like a lot of the CBS and ABC and all these other like mainstream TV shows, they're not afraid to play it safe anymore because they know they've got people whether they're there or not. Like it's just, and Father Ted would not fit in that category, I don't think. So
okay, yeah.
So the last episode, which is in a way is, I don't know if Americans have these type of TV shows, but we go into Night of the Nearly Dead, where Mrs. Doyle has this favorite TV presenter called Owen McLove. And so he's basically this really awful looking kind of guy. He wears jumpers. He likes having cups of tea with old ladies and things like that. He's like that. But obviously, what he's like on TV is complete opposite of what he actually is on. When you meet him in real life. And so it's a typical episode of like you should never meet your heroes because you might be disappointed by them. So like it's one of those situations. But I mean, like, so, and also he plays a pun on Night of the Living Dead as well. So you got all these, old ladies who really like him and want to see him, and Mrs. Doyle gets the opportunity to go see him in the parochial house, and so he comes over. But then obviously it's surrounded by all his fan base, if you will, and so they're basically trapped in the house all evening until it all like goes away.
Remember that episode because that was one of the last episodes of the series right before the series finale, and we actually did talk about how hilarious it was that a bunch of old women would be crowding around this house and trying to meet up with this famous guy, and he turns out to be just as a jerk and completely clueless. It's like, can I eat this jam? Or, oh, this is a sweater that's was inside of a cake or something. It's like, oh, I'm still gonna eat the cake. And the reason why he's there is because he won a contest. Mrs. Doyle won a contest of writing this beautiful poem, and he has to be there for the day. And then accidentally, Mrs. Doyle kind of like says the secret to one person, and then the one person just spreads the information to all of her friends, and then they just crowd around like a bunch of zombies, which is why it's called Night of the Nearly Dead. Then they just like want to like touch, they want to go to him and it's like, oh, we like your music, oh, we love you, can we just see you for a moment? And it's oh my god, it's so ridiculous. Yeah, like for some reason, like, there seems to be an obsession of like, so many things around the Craggy Island. And there was one episode about rabbits where there's such a huge infestation of rabbits. And, then we have like the situation where it's just a bunch of old people. It gets out of control sometimes. But yeah, I mean, the whole story about like never meeting your heroes. I mean, unfortunately, there are cases in which, yes, that does tend to happen, that people can be complete jerks, and as opposed to like if you were to see them on TV or on a movie and they're so nice. But there are some cases in which that's not true at all. There are people who are legitimately nice, but you just need to, not treat them like if they're above you. You just need to treat them like normal people. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
For those who are interested in watching Father Ted, you can go over to the Channel 4 website to watch all 25 episodes, but you need to have an account. So there's that. Father Ted is out on DVD. And also, you might even see a handful of some clips on YouTube if you're interested in checking it out. So, once again, thank you so much for coming on by, Aaron. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I really love this. It's been a really fun episode.
Yeah. And around September, we'll talk about Fawlty Towers, which that will be, celebrating its anniversary, but we'll get to that much later on. So, yeah, as usual, please plug and promote your stuff.
Yeah, so I'm on facebook.com/Arun Mehta Show. That's ARUNMEHTASHOW. Also on Twitter @Arun Mehta Show. Also on Instagram @Arun Mehta Show as well. And if you want to ask me a question on Tumblr, it's arunmehta.tumblr.com.
All right. And as for me, it's youtube.com/oldsschoollane, facebook.com/oldsschoollane. I'm on Twitter @Patty_B_Miranda. I post all of my archive podcasts on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Radio Public. New episodes of Casual Chats will be posted there first, and then it will be posted shortly after on YouTube. So if you are listening to this on Anchor or Spotify or any of those places, then this is where you will be getting your new episodes of Casual Chats and new episodes of Old School Lane interviews before anywhere else. So again, thank you so much for listening, everyone. For the very few people in America who know about Father Ted, let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on Father Ted. Who's your favorite character? What's your favorite episode? What's your favorite moment? And for those who are listening from the UK or Ireland or any parts of Europe who are familiar with Father Ted, please share your memories as well. And for the most people in America who have never even heard of Father Ted until listening to this podcast, and if you do watch it, what were your thoughts on it? Do you think that the show could work in America, or you'd think that the show would work fine on its own? Or maybe you didn't even like Father Ted because you didn't think it was funny. But no, seriously, just share your thoughts and feedback. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope to see you around soon, and take care.
Yep. And for myself, all I have to say is back off.
Goodbye, everybody.